Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah,
So you've brought us this really interesting mix of online stuff, all tied together by one name, Grimes.
that's right.
And our goal here, like always, is to sift through it all, pull out the key bits of info, and, lay it out clearly for you.
Yep, we're diving into TikTok comments, YouTube transcripts, the works, all centered on Grimes.
Get ready for some pretty surprising connections, I think.
Definitely. What's striking is just how many different things this name pops up in, so we're going to try and make sense of that variety for you without, drowning you in details.
Okay, so first stop seems to be, well, it's pretty dark. True crime.
Mm-hmm.
The unsolved 1956 murder of Barbara and Patricia Grimes in Chicago. This one, it still gets talked about, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge part of the online chatter and the sources you shared. It's a really tragic story. So, December 28th, 1956, you have these two sisters, Barbara, she's 15, Patricia's 13.
Right.
They head out to see an Elvis movie, Love Me Tender.
Get this, for the 11th time.
I know, incredible, right? Anyway, they told their mom, Loretta, they'd be home by 11:45 p.m.
And when that time came and went, Loretta knew something was wrong. Instantly. Even though they went to the movies a lot.
Yeah, apparently they were always punctual. She even sent her other kids down to the bus stop just in case they'd missed the last one or something.
But no luck.
No. And what came next was this massive search. The police, initially, they sort of floated the idea they'd run away.
With sailors, wasn't it? Something about a letter.
Exactly. Patricia had mentioned a letter from a sailor, and there was some incident before where they'd come home late with sailors after a movie. But Loretta, their mother, she was adamant,
She knew her girls.
said they wouldn't just take off, especially not with Patricia's birthday party planned just a few days later.
Weeks go by, and the story gets much, much darker. January 22nd, 1957.
That's when their bodies were found, out in Willow Springs, Illinois. Not actually that far from the police station, maybe a mile.
And the condition they were found in.
Yeah. They were nude. And early reports mentioned puncture wounds.
What jumps out at you about the discovery itself?
Well, the fact they were found covered in snow, it suggested they'd probably been there since the last big snowfall, which was around January 9th.
Okay, so that creates a big gap, almost 2 weeks between when they likely died and when they were last seen.
Right. And then you add in the autopsy reports, which were confusing, conflicting even. The first report said exposure was the cause of death, no signs of sexual assault. But later,
Later it came out that wasn't the whole story.
no. It seems the coroner's office actually deliberately held back information, evidence that strongly suggested Barbara had been raped, and maybe Patricia too.
Why would they do that?
The thinking, which seems really misguided now, is apparently to protect the girls' reputations. 1950s social norms and all that.
Wow. So that decision to suppress evidence? It must have affected the investigation.
Almost certainly. How could it not? They were working with incomplete, even misleading information from the start, likely sent them down the wrong path. It's disturbing. And then there's the whole issue of eyewitness sightings. People claiming they saw the girls after that January 9th date, after they were supposedly dead.
That's another huge complication. I mean, sure, some could be mistaken identity, lots of teenage girls dressed alike back then,
Right.
and maybe some wishful thinking, people wanting to believe they'd seen them alive. But some sightings were from people who actually knew the Grimes sisters.
Which makes it harder to dismiss.
Much harder. It just adds another layer of sort of confusion to the timeline.
Yeah, sounds like an incredibly frustrating case from the get-go. Okay, let's talk suspects. The sources mention quite a few.
They do. One of the first was a guy named Benny Bedwell. He was 21, had a background with traveling circuses.
And he confessed.
He did, gave the story about meeting the girls, spending days with them.
Yeah.
But his story had problems.
Yeah.
Big inconsistencies.
Like what?
Well, for one, he never mentioned the puncture wounds found on the bodies. And his claims about sexual activity didn't line up with the initial autopsy, even the incomplete one. And didn't his story change over time?
Yeah, it evolved. He started suggesting other people helped him get rid of the bodies, and then later, he took the whole confession back, said the police forced it out of him. Coercion.
So what's the takeaway on Bedwell? Was he involved?
It's really doubtful based on the evidence, the changing story, the inconsistencies. Plus, remember those other women, Irene Dean and Carole King?
Likely, yeah.
Their testimony, along with Richard Whitten's, actually backed up Bedwell's first story about meeting other girls who looked similar but weren't the Grimes sisters around that time. So it seems likely Bedwell was mixed up in something, but probably not the Grimes murders.
Okay, so maybe a false confession. Who else was on the radar?
There was Walter Krantz. the self-described psychic.
Oh, yeah, the guy who dreamed where the bodies were?
That's him. A week before they were found, he called the police anonymously, said he saw them in a dream near Santa Fe Park, which was eerily close to where they actually turned up.
Creepy. He must have been a prime suspect.
He was initially, but he passed 2 polygraph tests, lie detectors.
Which aren't always reliable, right?
Exactly. Their reliability is super questionable, which is why they usually aren't allowed in court. But back then, passing them helped clear him. He was eventually ruled out.
Still, quite a coincidence.
Uh-huh.
Okay, who's next? Matt Maxley.
Yeah, Matt Maxley, he was only 17. Reportedly, he failed a polygraph and also confessed.
Another confession?
Seems like it. But again, concerns about the polygraph's reliability, plus maybe coercion again? He was released. We don't have a ton of details on him from these sources.
Just dead end after dead end. What about Alfred Lawless?
He came along years later, 1962. He was already in prison, about to get out, and he confessed to killing the Grimes sisters.
Did they believe him?
Not really. Investigators figured out pretty quickly that all the details he gave were things that had been all over the newspapers back in '57.
Ah, so maybe just looking for attention.
Seems likely. Plus, he started confessing to other crimes he didn't do, so his credibility was shot.
Okay. That brings us to the last major suspect mentioned. Charles Melquist. This connection sounds significant.
It really does. Melquist is a very compelling figure in relation to this case. He was actually convicted of murdering another teenager, 15-year-old Bonnie Lee Scott, in 1958.
And there were similarities.
Disturbing ones. Bonnie Lee Scott's body was found decapitated near the same area where the Grimes girls were discovered.
Wow.
And there's more. Melquist apparently knew one of the lead investigators on the Grimes case, Sheldon Teller. There were also whispers, allegations about Melquist having connections to the Chicago political machine.
You mean like political influence?
Right. The idea that maybe those connections helped him get a lighter sentence for the Scott murder? A retired detective who reopened the Grimes case much later strongly believed Melquist was the guy.
But no definitive proof.
Not that could lead to charges, especially since Melquist died back in 2010. So it remains this really strong but unproven possibility.
Just layers upon layers of unanswered questions. The sources also mentioned the public reaction back then.
Oh, it was huge, massive media attention. Even Elvis Presley made a public statement.
Really? What did he say?
He basically urged his fans, teenagers, to go home and put their mothers' minds at ease.
Huh. And Loretta Grimes, the mother, she got ransom notes.
She did, several. But they were all traced back to someone with mental health issues, not connected to the actual crime. The media frenzy was intense. Even at the funeral, apparently, it was quite chaotic.
What a heartbreaking story. Unsolved after all this time.
Yeah.
Really makes you think. Okay, let's shift gears completely now.
Big shift.
Yeah, from real-life tragedy to a fictional family. The Grimes family from The Walking Dead.
Right, the TV show. It's amazing how the same name can exist in such totally different worlds, isn't it?
Totally. So in The Walking Dead, you've got Rick Grimes and his family, Lori, Carl, Judith, Michonne later on. They're kind of the core of the show, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The emotional anchor, so much of the drama revolves around Rick trying to keep them safe in that, zombie apocalypse world.
Yeah, his whole mission is protecting his family no matter what. That struggle, that drive, it's what hooks people, I think.
For sure. It hits those basic themes: family, survival, what you do for the people you love. The sources even mentioned deleted scenes focusing on the Grimes family. It just shows how central they were.
It's wild how influential that fictional family became. Okay, so we've had true crime, we've had popular fiction, but the name Grimes takes another pretty disturbing turn in these online sources.
Yeah, this next one is different. It's this narrative that's been going around online, especially TikTok, called the Grimes crimes.
Okay, now before we even get into it, the sources are very clear on this point, right?
Absolutely crucial. This is described explicitly as horror fiction. It is not real. It's important everyone understands that up front. It's a made-up story designed to be creepy and disturbing.
Got it. Fiction. So what's the story in this horror fiction?
It describes a fictional family, also named Grimes, who are portrayed as, like, a cult. And they supposedly committed these horrific acts against vulnerable people, foster kids, runaways.
How horrific are we talking?
The fictional story involves things like drugging victims and then forcibly stitching them into animal costumes for some kind of perverse entertainment. It's really graphic, really unsettling stuff.
Ugh. And in this fictional narrative, how did this supposedly come out?
The story goes that it was discovered in 2022. A former foster child supposedly had flashbacks triggered by playing the video game Five Nights at Freddy's, which then supposedly unlocked memories of this fictional abuse.
Right, okay, and there's mention of a fictional documentary, Banned Grimes Crime Documentary, Part 2.
Yes, part of the fiction. That bit describes finding this emaciated boy by the roadside back in 1991, according to the story.
And what was supposedly done to him?
The fiction describes him being covered in matted fur, his hands surgically altered into paws, his face changed to look like an animal, barely alive, all part of the fictional horror narrative attributed to this fictional Grimes family.
This fictional story also draws some kind of comparison between families and cults.
It does. It uses this horrific premise to explore, the darker side of family dynamics,
Hmm.
how families can be insular, demanding obedience, similar to cult structures, and how leaving that structure in the fictional context is made out to be incredibly dangerous.
So it's tapping into anxieties about control and hidden darkness.
Exactly. It's a really potent, if disturbing, example of online folklore or creepypasta attaching itself to a name.
Okay, wow. Deep breath. Let's move to the final Grimes context, our sources highlight. The musician Grimes, Claire Boucher,
Right. A totally different sphere again. Contemporary musician, well-known public figure.
obviously known for her music, but also very publicly known for her past relationship with Elon Musk and their children.
Definitely. And the sources reflect a lot of the public discussion around her.
What kind of things are people talking about online based on what we have?
Well, there's stuff about her asking to see her kids with Musk. There are also mentions of interviews, like one with Lex Fridman, where she talks about motherhood and how society values it or doesn't.
Yeah, I remember some buzz around that. And reactions to her performances, too, like Coachella.
Yep. Reactions to her music, her shows, and just broader online chat about, what happened to Grimes? Has her relationship with Musk changed her art, her career? That kind of speculation.
There's even a bit from a Time magazine interview mentioned.
Yeah, where she's asked, like, point blank if she thinks she's evil.
Whoa.
It just shows the level of intense scrutiny she's under, how her public image and her art get picked apart and debated. It's fascinating in a way.
And just as a quick aside, the sources briefly mention another Grimes, Regan Grimes, in bodybuilding. Just shows the name itself is out there in lots of unrelated ways.
Good point. It grounds us a bit. It's not just these big, intense stories. It's also just a name.
So, wrapping this deep dive up, that we've really covered some ground, all linked by Grimes. From that awful unsolved Chicago murder to the zombie-fighting Grimes family in The Walking Dead, that deeply disturbing online horror fiction.
Yeah, the Grimes crimes.
And finally, the musician Grimes, Claire Boucher, and all the discourse around her. It's quite the spectrum.
It really is. And I think the main aha moment here for you listening is just seeing how one single name can carry so many different meanings, so many different stories, some real, some fictional, some tragic, some pop culture. Hopefully you now have a clearer map of these different contexts.
Yeah, you see the name Grimes now, and you might think of several different things, not just one. So reflecting on all this, what bigger questions does it raise for you?
Well, it definitely makes you think about our ongoing fascination with true crime, doesn't it? That need for answers in the face of tragedy.
Sure.
And it highlights the power of fiction, especially online fiction now, to create these really potent, sometimes scary narratives that spread so fast.
Right, the Grimes crimes example.
Exactly. And then there's the whole aspect of public figures, like the musician Grimes, how their lives, their art, get tangled up in public perception and debate in the digital age. It's complex.
Definitely gives you food for thought. And hey, if any one of these particular Grimes stories caught your attention,
Yeah, dive deeper.
absolutely. You could read more about the Grimes sisters' cases. There's a lot out there. Or watch The Walking Dead if you haven't. Maybe look into those fictional Grimes crime stories critically, of course.
Or check out Grimes's music and interviews. See what you think for yourself.
Our whole aim here was just to give you that overview, connect the dots between these different sources mentioning Grimes, and hopefully give you those insights without making your head spin.
Exactly. A shortcut to being, pretty well informed on why this name keeps popping up in such different ways.